We stand on the precipice of the Gilded Age, a time of staggering, almost unimaginable wealth, where American titans carved out empires in steel, rail, and finance. It was an era of defiant display, a theatrical performance of power played out on the coast of Newport, Rhode Island, where the jagged cliffs met the restless Atlantic. The ocean, here, is an eternal witness to ambition, and nowhere did that ambition crystallize more magnificently, or more tragically, than in a structure designed to be the ultimate statement of supremacy, the Breakers. It is not merely a house, it is a monument to aspiration, a palace built to outshine European royalty, yet behind its facade of Italian Renaissance splendor lay a deeper, more complicated truth, a story of family struggle, devastating loss, and the heavy price paid for ascending to the pinnacle of American society. To understand the Breakers, we must first understand the family who commanded its creation, a dynasty whose name became synonymous with colossal fortune, the Vanderbilts. The roots of this story burrow back to Cornelius, the Commodore, Vanderbilt, the shrewd, irascible patriarch who, through sheer force of will, consolidated the disparate early rail lines and shipping routes of a burgeoning nation, amassing a fortune that, by some calculations, made him the wealthiest American in history. But this documentary is not about the Commodore. It is about his descendants, the generation who inherited this staggering wealth and the immense pressure it brought. They were charged not simply with maintaining the fortune, but with legitimizing it, turning raw capitalist power into recognized, acceptable aristocracy. This quest for legitimacy reached its zenith with one of his grandsons, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, and his formidable wife, Alice Claypool Gwynn. In 1885, they purchased a relatively modest wooden house, already called the Breakers, perched on a magnificent 7-acre oceanfront plot. This first house was a statement, yes, but not the final, indelible declaration they ultimately desired. The destruction of this initial structure, not by the slow decay of time, but by a sudden, consuming conflagration in 1892, set the stage for the true masterwork, the architectural apotheosis that would secure their place in American legend. This devastating fire, while a loss, was immediately interpreted by Cornelius and Alice not as a setback, but as an opportunity, a phoenix moment that allowed them to dream on a scale far grander than before, unshackled from the constraints of the previous design. They would build not just a summer cottage, but a palace deserving of the Vanderbilt name, one that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the great ancestral homes of Europe, an expression of their absolute mastery over the American landscape. For this monumental task, they enlisted the services of Richard Morris Hunt, the preeminent architect of the Gilded Age, a man who had studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris and brought a reverence for European classicism to the raw ambition of American wealth. Hunt was given an essentially unlimited budget and a clear directive: create the most magnificent residence in the country. The result was a 70-room Italian Renaissance-style palazzo, a 4-story structure boasting 125,000 square feet of floor space, requiring a small army of artisans, craftsmen, and laborers working around the clock. Over 2,500 workers toiled to bring this vision into stone, brick, and imported marble, a construction effort that, even today, defies belief in its scale and speed. The family's investment in the project was staggering, estimated at $7 million in 1895, an amount equivalent to hundreds of millions of dollars today. This expenditure was not frivolous. It was a calculated cultural investment intended to project the image of a stable, powerful, and enduring dynasty. The completed mansion, unveiled in 1895, was breathtaking. It was a symphony of imported materials, platinum leaf on the walls of the morning room, rare marble and alabaster everywhere, and a 50-foot-high great hall inspired by the palaces of Renaissance Genoa. The house was structurally designed to be fireproof, a direct, defiant response to the tragedy of the first Breakers. No expense was spared in its technological innovation either, featuring electric light and an advanced heating system, a testament to the seamless integration of ancient grandeur with modern convenience. When the Vanderbilts hosted their first grand balls and soirees within its massive walls, the message was clear. This was American aristocracy defined, a new order that commanded the respect of the world. Yet, the very peak of this magnificent achievement coincided with the beginning of a profound, and ultimately heartbreaking, decline for the man who drove its creation. Cornelius Vanderbilt II, often described as the most devoted, meticulous, and perhaps the most burdened of the Commodore's descendants, suffered a devastating cerebral hemorrhage in 1896, barely a year after The Breakers was finished. The master builder was struck down at the height of his power, his vibrant energy replaced by debilitating illness and physical paralysis. The man who orchestrated the very symphony of opulence and stability was now profoundly vulnerable, a captive in his own gilded cage. The magnificent Great Hall, designed for the exuberant dances of society, suddenly became a heavy, silent space. The Breakers, intended as a monument to Vanderbilt power, rapidly transformed into the backdrop for a quiet, protracted domestic tragedy. This monumental structure, which required a fortune to build and a family to inhabit, now stood as a stark, dramatic contrast to the fragility of human health and the unpredictable cruelty of fate. The untold story of the Breakers is not found in the architectural details, magnificent as they are, but in the human drama that unfolded within its extravagant walls, where the weight of a legendary name and the immensity of a colossal inheritance began to crush the very people it was meant to elevate. The dream was realized, but the cost, personal and profound, was just beginning to be counted. The illness of Cornelius Vanderbilt II placed an unbearable mantle upon his wife, Alice. She was already the undisputed arbiter of the Vanderbilt social world, possessing the steel and strategy necessary to navigate the treacherous currents of Gilded Age society, but now she was forced to become the quiet, indispensable engine driving the entire family apparatus, all while maintaining the glittering facade of the Breakers. Alice was a woman of enormous capability, a true matriarch whose authority was absolute within the confines of her magnificent home. She continued to host, to entertain, and to project an image of effortless continuity, yet the reality was that she was presiding over a palace that now served as a hospital, a silent testament to her husband's slow decline. This period, from 1896 until Cornelius's death in 1899, saw the greatest architectural achievement of the family become inextricably linked with their deepest private grief. The vast, echoing rooms, designed for grand celebration, frequently hosted only the muffled steps of nurses and physicians. Upon Cornelius's passing, the immense fortune was divided, and the Breakers, along with a significant portion of the inheritance, passed to their eldest son, Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt. Alfred, however, was a man of a very different temperament than his meticulous, driven father. He inherited the wealth and the responsibility, but not necessarily the passion for maintaining the rigid social structure and the architectural legacy his parents had so carefully constructed. Alfred was known for his sporting interests, his love of horses, and a restlessness that made the ceremonial duties of Gilded Age society feel like an unnecessary burden. He often preferred to spend his time away from Newport, away from the weight of the Breakers, utilizing it far less frequently than his parents had. This shift marked the beginning of the Breakers' transition from a vigorously occupied family center to a stunning, but occasionally dormant, architectural trophy, a beautiful vessel sometimes adrift from its purpose. Alfred's personal life was soon thrust into the glare of public scrutiny with a highly publicized divorce, a scandal that reverberated through the rigid moral codes of the time, further straining the family's carefully crafted image. Unlike his parents, who operated with a calculated sense of aristocratic propriety, Alfred seemed more inclined to follow his own restless star, a trait that both fascinated and scandalized the society columns. But the greatest tragedy associated with Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, a tragedy that underscored the ephemeral nature of all Gilded Age fortunes and ambitions, occurred not in the quiet halls of Newport, but in the icy waters of the North Atlantic. In 1915, Alfred, having traveled to Europe on business, booked passage for his return voyage on the most technologically advanced and imposing ship of its time, the RMS Lusitania. The decision was a simple matter of convenience, yet the consequences were cataclysmic. On May 7, 1915, the Lusitania was struck by a German U-boat torpedo off the coast of Ireland. The sinking was swift and brutal, a moment that shocked the world and became a precursor to America's involvement in the World War. Amidst the chaos of the sinking ship, the actions of Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt were recounted in gripping detail by survivors, cementing his image not as a reckless millionaire, but as a quiet hero. Eyewitness accounts suggest that Alfred, calmly and without thought for his own safety, used his lifebelt to secure a young mother and her baby, making no attempt to save himself, knowing he could not swim. He was last seen standing on the deck, offering quiet reassurance to those around him, a man of immense wealth and privilege facing the ultimate equalization of death with dignity and selfless courage. His body was never recovered. The loss of Alfred was a shattering blow, not only to the Vanderbilt family but also to the image of American aristocracy. The very symbol of the next generation's promise was extinguished in a historic catastrophe. The Breakers, once again, became a place of mourning, its architectural permanence standing in stark, devastating contrast to the sudden, violent finality of Alfred's end. The story now falls to Gertrude Vanderbilt, the wife Alfred had divorced, and their son, Cornelius Vanderbilt III, known as Neely, who was still a child when his father perished. The house, initially built by one Cornelius and passed to Alfred, now came under the careful, if detached, stewardship of the executors for young Neely. The cycle of inheritance, ambition, and tragedy continued to spin, but the world around the Breakers was changing rapidly. The grand, theatrical displays of the Gilded Age were giving way to the grinding realities of the 20th century: war, economic volatility, and a fundamental shift in the very concept of American wealth. The sheer scale and expense required to maintain a palace like the Breakers were becoming increasingly difficult to justify, even for a family of such legendary means. The house itself remained, magnificent and unyielding, a testament to an era that was rapidly receding into history, waiting for the next generation to grapple with its immense, beautiful, and profoundly burdened legacy. The stage was set for the family's final, reluctant act within the grand halls of their architectural masterpiece. The stewardship of the Breakers, after the trauma of the Lusitania and the death of Alfred, fell to his younger half-sister, Gladys Vanderbilt II. She was a figure of quiet strength and European sophistication, having married into Hungarian aristocracy, Count Laszlo Széchenyi. Gladys possessed a deep sense of duty and a genuine affection for the architectural masterpiece her parents had created, yet her life, and the focus of her married life, was primarily on the continent. This meant that while the Breakers was flawlessly maintained, its massive doors opened only occasionally for the grand social rituals of Newport. The house functioned more as a spectacular seasonal retreat than the vibrant, constantly occupied family seat its Hilders had envisioned. This shift in usage reflected the broader decline of Newport as the unchallenged social capital of the American elite. The frantic energy of the Gilded Age had dissipated, replaced by a more subdued, and globally dispersed, notion of wealth. The real challenge to the Breakers arrived not in the form of fire or personal tragedy, but through the invisible, seismic shift of the Great Depression. The financial cataclysm of the 1930s fundamentally reshaped the landscape of American fortune. While the Vanderbilt wealth was vast, even it was not immune to the pressures of collapsing markets and punitive new tax structures. The sheer, relentless financial burden of maintaining a 70-room palace, with its demanding staff requirements, continuous repairs, and heating costs, became increasingly impractical, even for the inheritors of one of America's greatest fortunes. The era of the American palace was drawing to a close, replaced by a more discreet, less ostentatious approach to wealth management. As the decades passed and the scale of the maintenance costs became staggering, Gladys Vanderbilt Széchenyi faced an agonizing choice. The family could no longer afford the luxury of retaining the Breakers purely as a private, sporadically used summer residence without jeopardizing the long-term financial stability of her descendants. In 1948, Gladys made the decision that would forever change the fate of the house, transforming it from a private sanctuary into a public icon. She entered into an agreement with the Preservation Society of Newport County, leasing the mansion to them for a symbolic annual rent of just $1. The condition was simple and historic. The public would be allowed access to walk through its magnificent halls and witness the pinnacle of American Gilded Age design. This was not a full sale, but an act of profound, pragmatic preservation. Gladys allowed her ancestral home, the very symbol of her family's triumph and tragedy, to be open to the masses. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. People flocked to Newport to see how the Vanderbilts had truly lived, drawn by the irresistible pull of curiosity, awe, and perhaps a touch of democratic schadenfreude. The Breakers quickly became the symbol of Newport, a living museum of an era gone by, its purpose transformed from private display to public education. The final, decisive step in the mansion's transition came in 1972, after the passing of Gladys Vanderbilt Széchenyi. The remaining Vanderbilt descendants, recognizing the immense historical and financial impracticality of keeping the palace private, made the decision to sell the house and its land to the Preservation Society of Newport County for a negotiated price. However, in a touching and deeply personal arrangement, the family reserved a small, third-floor apartment, a humble space nestled within the servants' quarters, to be retained by her youngest daughter, Countess Sylvia Sichagny. This decision allowed a direct descendant of Cornelius and Alice to maintain a tangible, physical connection to the family's greatest architectural achievement. For decades, Countess Sichagny quietly resided in her modest apartment, a constant, living link between the palace's grand past and its function as a public museum. She was literally living within the history that millions came to observe. This final, subtle detail encapsulates the poignant duality of the Breakers, a house of unparalleled public grandeur that, for one family member, remains simply home, albeit a home surrounded by the echoing reverence of history and the foot traffic of countless tourists. The story of the Breakers, therefore, is ultimately a story of surrender, the necessary surrender of private opulence to public preservation, ensuring that the legacy of ambition, design, and deeply human tragedy would endure for generations, no longer locked away behind closed gates, but open for the world to ponder. The enduring power of the Breakers lies in its capacity to hold both the dazzling ambition of the Gilded Age and the subsequent human frailty of the family who built it. As visitors now wander through the magnificent rooms, the state dining room capable of seating 40 guests, the gold-encrusted morning room, and the immense, vaulted Great Hall, they are walking through more than just a house. They are traversing a historical timeline compressed into marble and mosaic. Every surface, every artifact, whispers not just of Vanderbilt wealth, but of the specific, tangible human decisions that followed the first Cornelius's stroke, the weight of Alice's matriarchal duty, Alfred's restless spirit lost to the Atlantic, and Gladys's eventual, difficult choice to open her private world to the public eye. Consider the detailed architectural choices made by Richard Morris Hunt under the uncompromising direction of Cornelius II and Alice. The entire structure was built around a vast, internal steel frame, an acknowledgement of modern engineering, discreetly hidden beneath the opulent skin of Renaissance Revival style. This was a deliberate statement, power rooted in American steel and technology, cloaked in the aesthetic legitimacy of European aristocracy. The Grand Loggia, facing the ocean, was designed not just for views, but for the performance of social distinction, a stage set against the backdrop of the relentless, indifferent sea. The very stone and craftsmanship spoke of permanence, yet the rapid succession of personal tragedies within its first 2 decades reveals the profound irony that no amount of wealth or architectural stability could ward off fate. The Breakers stands as a magnificent paradox, a monument to enduring success built by a family marked by fleeting happiness. The final chapter of this structure's story, its transition into one of America's most visited house museums, ensures its physical longevity, but also completes its symbolic evolution. By becoming a public entity, the Breakers escaped the inevitable fate of many other Gilded Age mansions that were demolished or severely fragmented due to overwhelming costs and changing tastes. The Preservation Society of Newport County, guided by its commitment to historical accuracy, became the vigilant custodian of the Vanderbilt narrative. They ensure that the opulence is understood contextually, not just as extravagance, but as an artifact of American economic history, a tangible representation of the concentration of capital at the close of the 19th century. And so, we return to the heart of the saga. The forgotten story is not that the Vanderbilts built a colossal home, that fact is well known, but that this colossal home was also the silent witness to their most profound vulnerabilities. It was the setting for the protracted illness of its creator, the anchor point for a restless son lost at sea, and the persistent financial and emotional burden that ultimately forced the family to relinquish their privacy. The Breakers is the magnificent, enduring record of a family's quest for societal affirmation and the subsequent, inevitable collision between immense material power and fragile human existence. The ocean still breaks upon the cliffs below its foundation, a constant reminder of time's relentless march, indifferent to the marble and gold, whispering that even the grandest architectural masterpieces cannot insulate their inhabitants from the universal human experience of loss. Its beauty is breathtaking, but its quiet tragedy is what renders its story truly unforgettable. Quote,